Morning tea time, fam. Eric here. Sunday, August 31st at 7 a.m. Eastern Time. Thank you all for showing up for episode 8, which is Rebuilding the Foundation. I was living, not surviving. Surviving got me to where I am today, but living is what I had to learn next. And that took a significant amount of time to understand, simply because I was learning as I was going. And, you know, understand, like, trying to figure things out and not knowing whether it's right or wrong, you end up making mistakes and you have to learn from those. So, given the dynamic of my family and not having that, hey, sit down and talk, asking questions and getting the answers because I wasn't taught that. It was survival of the fittest. Um, so, which brings kind of like the next point with, stuffing everything down, overthinking, self-protection, because that's all that I knew. You know, and I didn't know how to verbalize how I felt. I didn't know how to, you know, feel certain things because it just wasn't a part of the day to day, and and it took me a long time. More time than I would like to admit, but I'm here to be truthful and here to be honest. Is that you would think by the time I was 18 I'd have things figured out. Nope. By the time 25, nope. 30, nope. I hate to say it, but it really took me a significant amount of time to really kind of care for myself and learn how to live. Um, but like I did it in pieces, along the way because I made a lot of mistakes, from whether it was choices, choices that I made in my early 20s. They weren't the right ones, and that was really kind of like my wake up call, like my mid 20s, um, because it was either go to jail, live, or die. Like, and when you have that, kind of mentality, and your back's up against the wall, you have to understand that, you know, you want to choose life. That's the best way. The world is much better with you in it. I don't care what you say. I don't care how bad things are. You know, it's when you start to put yourself first and understand that you're not going to make everybody happy. Stop sweating the small stuff, and just maximize on each day. It's really one of the things that once I get out of my funk and said, hey, listen, I'm done with this. I'm done being a quote unquote burden, to myself and to others at that point. It was, all right, I have to, get up and get back on the horse. And that's what I did. And it's taken me, a significant amount of time because of the choices that I made, um, to get to where, I enjoy life. Like truly, truly enjoy life. I've always been grateful that, knock on wood, no major medical stuff has occurred. But in the same token, it was because I'd stuffed everything down. It ate away at me. As I say, it's like, if you stuff things down, you turn into a stick of dynamite. And one day somebody's going to light that fuse and you just blow up. And that's what you can't have. So I had to learn how to live, understand connection, you know, building habits that sustain, you know, my way of life instead of draining, surrounding yourself with, positive people, is first and foremost. Clearing your mindset, um, that's really what it is. Your circle, like, what I've always said about, my friends is, excuse me, keep it uh, keep it small. Why? Because those, you only come across a certain few that truly understand you. Anything beyond that, they really don't. Um, but it's all in, how you are. If you're extremely outgoing, you know what I mean? You can have a whole slew of friends because you're just that social butterfly. You're constantly, you're in the thick of it. And that's fine, like, but for myself, I've whittled my friend pool down to, very few. Um, when you when you realize that, you know, when you're trying to survive day to day, um, that it's a draining aspect, especially when you don't have goals, um, and you don't necessarily have a foundation. Um, and that's really where it kind of started with me, was been like, okay, what do I want to do? And at that point, I still didn't know, you know, because, oh, excuse me, I'm a little tired this morning. But, it was all about finding, you know, what can I do to take care of myself? Self care, mental, physical, spiritual. Um, Physical, I've always been a big guy. You know what I mean? I always struggled with my weight. For the longest time, I would, do roller coaster weight. Go up, go down, go up, go down, go up, go up, go up, go down. And I did everything. I worked out. I did crash diets. I did, um, diet pills back in the day. But as I found since my divorce, it's consistency. It's going to the gym for me, right? The gym is my therapy. It's the best investment that you can give yourself, is going to the gym, getting those free endorphins going after a workout. Um, and you could go to a regular commercial gym. You could go to a specialized gym. Like I do CrossFit, and to me, CrossFit is exactly what, like, I wanted to do. Um, and I delayed it for a number of years, and I still remember watching it at like 2 a.m. one time on ESPN, and I was like, "What the hell is this?" And I remember seeing one of the female athletes, Amy Thorstad, who actually happened to win the games that year, just absolutely rip through a workout in like 8 minutes. I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. Um, and having seen that, I was like, oh man, this looks awesome. Like the competition, and at the time, I was, like, I was working out. Like I would go to a commercial gym, you know. And the funny thing is, they had a CrossFit attached in the back, and I was like, oh, I saw this. What is this? Like, how can I join? Now, mind you, the gym that I used to go to was like $45 $40 a month or something, like really cheap. It was a great gym too. I loved it. And they're like, oh yeah, you can do that. I was like, oh, is it included with the price? And they're like, no, it's separate. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? Like, how much is it? And they're like, it's just like $185 a month. I was like, what? You know. Now, mind you, that was 15 years ago. Um, and oddly enough, the price still stays the same. However, the benefit that you get, with the community and the workouts, especially if you get tied into a good, a good box, a good affiliate. You're there with, um, coaches who care. You're there with the community. The one thing you can, you know, say to yourself is that, the one big respect, I guess, is the fact that you're all going through the same pain. And there's something, you know, awesome about that, is that for 5, 10, 15, 40 minutes, or an hour and a half, depending on what the workout is, or the, hero water, um, that you're all going through the same. And there's something uplifting about that. It's very supportive. And to me, that's my church. That's my therapy. Others may physically go to church, and that's perfectly fine. Like, you do what you have to do. You know, if you enjoy laying on a couch and talking to a therapist because it makes you feel better, excuse me, do it. You know what I mean? If you want to go to the gym 5 times a week, do it. If you like to run, like say, hey, listen, you know what? I don't like weights. I'm gonna go running. Great. Oh, what? You like yoga? Perfect. You know, you just find that additional outlet that is going to suit you. You know, buy a Peloton, sit at home, you know, go through their program, you know, get the old insanity videos, Sean T, you know, like, and get your butt kicked by that. Like, that's, you know, whatever it is works for you, do it. You like to ride a bike, you like to go for walks, whatever, you know, just find that outlet. And in the same token, you know, with that, you also have to learn how to say no. And that's to, um, you know, negative aspects that come into your life. People, especially work, like that's, you know, it's almost rampant. And that's what stinks, you know what I mean? Because, you know, you, you some people feel obligated um, when they're at work, and it's just like no, like you have to learn how to say no. Like if you're tired, you have to get up early, you know, and your friend says, hey, listen, you want to go out for a drink, you want to go out for dinner? No, you know, like and it's okay to say no, and you have to be comfortable with that. Again, don't try to please everybody. Please yourself. That's really where it comes into. And one of the biggest things for me was honest conversations. No more towing the line of, you know, um, of anything. It was flat out. And being able to look at your best friend, family member, parent, lover, whatever, is having those hard, honest conversations because it's one of the ways that you're going to grow, both as an individual, as a couple, or building a stronger bond within your family. Um, I can tell you that, you know, with my family, it doesn't necessarily get received well. Um, but it's something that I practice um, with my girlfriend especially, you know, and with my friends, you know, like I'm honest with them, just because, you know, I keep it a buck, um, because they deserve the truth, they deserve to know, um, and that's and that's also being, you know, clear and transparent with them. There's no gray area. There's nothing behind it. Because if you're honest with somebody, you know, it clears your conscience. You know, and you're being factual, and that's really what it comes down to is being factual about everything. Um, you know, and understanding that over time, like I said, I mentioned consistency. You know, with my workouts, that is really implied with everything that you do. You know, be disciplined, um, be consistent. Um, over intensity. You know what I mean? Like you can be all in on something and that's awesome. That's fantastic. You know, like good for you. Um, but in the same token, be consistent with it. Don't do it for, you know, 7 days and because the eighth day comes and something comes about that you can't do that. Like, excuse me, follow through. That's, you know, if you write down goals, follow through with them. Set time frames. Set short term, set midterm, set long term goals, and attack each one of them as they come. You know, don't move on to the next one until the first one's done. Um, you know, when I go into relationships, right? And I've had my fair share of, you know, good relationships, bad relationships. Um, but you know, when you're living, you know, you act a certain way. as opposed to um, how can I kind of put this in? Like as opposed to surviving, right? So and living is really, when you have a focus, whether it be, on your partner, like you don't put yourself necessarily first in some capacities in relationships. And I know, like I was a pleaser. You know what I mean? I was a yes man at times because I didn't want to, upset the apple cart, and it was very surface level. And those were all my relationships up until my current one. It was all surface level, and like that has given me a new perspective on how to view things. So, um, now whether it's a romantic relationship or it's a personal relationship like friendships, um, you know, going from surviving to living, it's a whole different mindset, and that's what you kind of have to prepare yourself for. And obviously if you become a parent, um, that's a whole other thing. You like I've said, you can read 1,000 books, you can talk to 1,000 people, but until you're going through it yourself, you don't fully understand. And a lot of it's reactive. Um, Getting used to, um, having your life be drastically changed because it's not about you, it's not about your partner, your wife, your husband, whomever. Um, it's about your child, and you know, and that's one of the hardest things. And really, like when I got divorced, it was, you know, like could I have been petty? Yes. Did I want to be petty? No, because what would that accomplish for me? Honestly, what would it accomplish? In fact, you're trying to make a point, you know. And I get it. It's tough. It really is. But at the end of the day, it's about the kids, plain and simple. You know, and when you're living in that, it's a whole new world. And I had to adjust. I had to really you know dig deep and understand that I was a single dad for a while. And still am, but um, you know, and not having that extra support around it, it was tough. Not gonna lie, it took a lot of adjusting, and I still constantly adjust, to this day. Um, but we can dive more into parenting later on because truthfully, I wouldn't change it for the world. It's one of the best things you can possibly do is become a parent and raise your kid. Um, Now, like, here's the thing: is like when you're building stuff, you want to build it with intention. You want to, or you have to, you know, do it with creating structure, doing routines, values, and boundaries. Now, boundaries are something that was never really on my radar in relationships, but I've come to find that you have to create boundaries because at the end of the day, you know, you know your worth. And that's, the one thing that you kind of have to keep in the forefront here is, even though you have a romantic interest in somebody and you guys are a couple, and whether it's, girlfriend, engaged, or married, you have to have those boundaries. And that person has to respect those boundaries. If they don't, they're not the right person for you. Because it is okay to say no, because there are certain people that get it, but there's others that if you give them an inch, they're going to take a mile. And that's really kind of where that comes in. You shouldn't be anybody's doormat, you know. Um, you really have to. Um, get yourself aligned. What do you like? What don't you like? You have to have these conversations with yourself. Write them down, journal it. Um, and if you can't figure it out, ask for help. Don't try to shoulder everything yourself. Um, I'm a big advocate of asking for help. I have no problem asking for help um, if I need it, because I know I can't do it alone. I know I'm going to do my best. However, there's going to be plenty of speed bumps that come into play, and I'm going to be like, oh, well, that didn't work. So now I have to find out how it works. So always ask for help. Um, one thing in my current relationship is that, you know, the pace at which we're taking it, it's a brick by brick, and we've said that in building our foundation, and you have to do that with yourself, is brick by brick, which is why I tell you, if you set yourself up with routines, you set yourself up with schedules, um, with that sort of structure, um, make sure that you finish the first part before you go into the second one. Simply because um, if you don't, then things are going to be, you know, feel off, or they're going to turn, things are going to feel awry, and that's not what you want. You've had plenty of confusion, plenty of misunderstandings, self doubt. You don't need that anymore. So by creating the structure, um, on the day, like I said, on your short term, on your midterm, on your long term goals, make sure that you are following those to a T. Because that, you do that for weeks on end, you will see eventually the progress that you made, and it just becomes habit. And that's probably one of the best things that you can hope for, is the fact that you don't have to reference your journal, your phone, wherever. You don't have to reference those, because you've been doing it, you've been working it every single day. And if you do that, tight. Um, but if you do that, you will see a change. You may not see it right away, but others will notice it, and that's really where the reward or the benefit of your hard work comes out, because you may not see it, but others may. And that's ultimately what you want to strive for, every single day, to be able to, understand that. So, you know, like when it comes to, the surviving and living, it's much better to be living than it is surviving. You know, um, just kind of keep this in mind: is you can't live if you're only surviving. Rebuilding the foundation isn't easy, but I guarantee you it's worth it. And so kind of keep that, in the back of your head as you're going through this transformation on your journey, um, and understanding. Um, you know, if you have any comments, I invite you to share them. You know, what, answer me this: what does foundation mean to you? Leave it in the comments. Let me know. We'll strike up a conversation and, talk about it. Um, so, with that being said, um, I appreciate you guys, checking out the videos. Make sure you like and subscribe, and you guys kick ass and enjoy your Sunday. Sunday fun day coming up on the holiday weekend. Um, tomorrow's Labor Day, so for those, enjoy your time away. Um, enjoy your time off with your family, friends, whatever that you guys have scheduled. But you know what? We'll catch you next week. All right, take care.